The Once and Future Present, Episode 2, What Does It Mean to Think Like a Historian? An AP European History podcast brought to you by Hammer History Productions. Today, we're drawing from two great resources in this episode. History, a very short introduction by John H. Arnold, part of the Oxford University Press, very short introduction series. It's packed with great insight on the nature of historical thinking and interpretation. We are also using readings and activities from the Methods and Skills of History, a practical guide by Michael Salsalavouris and Connell Furet. It's been a great resource in our class to help us dig into how historians think. Welcome back to the Once and Future Present, the AP European History podcast from Hammer History Productions. I'm Casey, your host and student guide. In our last episode, we talked about what history is. Not just the past, but how we interpret the past. That really got me thinking. If history is interpretation, then how do historians decide what story to tell? I brought that question to my teachers, Der Morgan.
I am excited for our conversation today, Casey.
And Professor Theo, who is also back for this episode.
Great to join you again, Casey.
From both the Methods and Skills of History and History. A very short introduction, we learned that history isn't about recovering some pure, objective truth. It's about making meaning from fragments. Arnold puts it well when he says that historians are always reading between the lines, trying to understand not just what happened, but why people thought and acted the way they did. That idea really stuck with me. Arnold gives some great examples in the book. One that stood out to me was about how we know what happened in a medieval courtroom. There's this record of a peasant woman making a sarcastic comment during a trial, and we only know about it because someone bothered to write it down. Arnold points out that it's not just the fact that she said it, but that someone in power felt it was worth recording. That tells us something about both her world and ours, about power, language, and social boundaries. Another example is about a bishop named Odo. Historians originally believed he was a hero because the records said he fought bravely. But later evidence showed that Odo probably exaggerated his role, maybe even rewrote parts of the story. That shows how fragile and layered historical evidence can be, and how interpretation changes when we discover new pieces of the puzzle.
That's a great way to put it, Casey. There is a mindset. Historians rely on what we call historical thinking skills. In our classroom, we group them into what we call the 5 C's: contextualization, change and continuity, causation, complexity, and contingency.
And these are more than just academic buzzwords. They're tools for interpretation. If history is a puzzle, the 5 C's are how you make sense of all the pieces.
All right, let's go one by one. Start with contextualization. What does that actually mean?
Contextualization means putting a historical event into the time and place where it happened. It's about understanding the world around the people who lived through it, their beliefs, institutions, norms. You can't make sense of the past without knowing the setting.
For example, think about Oliver Cromwell's campaign in Ireland. If you judge it just from a modern perspective, it looks like a straightforward atrocity. But once you dig into the religious and political tensions of the 1640s, the legacy of the Reformation, and the brutal norms of 17th century warfare, you get a more complicated, if still disturbing, picture.
Or to give a more current example, think about debates over social media. To understand today's arguments, you'd need to know about the rise of digital technology, political polarization, and even global capitalism. Context always matters. Without it, we end up misunderstanding people's motives and the pressures they were under.
So, context doesn't excuse behavior, but it helps us understand it.
Exactly. As that reading said, the past is a foreign country. People thought differently then. They acted on beliefs we may no longer share.
Okay, the next one is change and continuity. That seems obvious. Things change over time.
Yes and no. The key is to see what changed and what stayed the same. A revolution might change political leadership, but social structures or economic systems might continue.
Remember the example of post-war Germany from the activity? The reading talked about democratization and modernization, but also showed how older systems lingered. You can have both change and continuity at the same time.
Even in our own time, think about how smartphones have changed how we communicate, but not necessarily what we value in relationships. We text now instead of calling, sure, but friendship, status, belonging, those have stuck around.
So historians are kind of always balancing those?
Right. It's not either or. It's both and. That's where complexity comes in. But we'll get there in a minute.
Okay, what about causation? I know we're supposed to avoid saying something had one cause.
Yes, that's what we call multiple causality. Rarely is anything caused by just one thing. Take World War I. It didn't happen just because of the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. You also have militarism, tangled alliances, imperial rivalries, and nationalistic movements all piling on.
And don't forget long-term causes versus short-term triggers. The long build-up of military arms and alliances set the stage, but the spark lit the fire. Same with the French Revolution. Enlightenment ideas, economic hardship, and weak leadership all played a part.
In the classroom, we had you work through the causality activity, where you had to label different kinds of causes and consider their relationships. That helps build the habit of thinking in layers, not lines.
So you're building a web, not a straight line?
Exactly. And that leads us to complexity, which is maybe the hardest one.
Complexity means embracing the messy parts of history. You resist oversimplifying. You allow contradictions. It's about asking better questions and accepting that answers are rarely neat.
That's why in the causality activity, we had you look at different frames of reference: economic, ideological, individual. Historians emphasize different factors based on their perspective. One historian might focus on material conditions. Another might highlight beliefs and ideas.
Think of the Industrial Revolution. It led to amazing technological advances, but also child labor, pollution, and urban overcrowding. It's not all good or all bad. It's both.
I want to pause on that for a second. Calling something good or bad is itself an interpretation. It reflects our modern values and what we think matters. To some, the Industrial Revolution was progress. To others, especially workers and children living through it, it was exploitative. Historians try to describe consequences and impacts rather than make moral judgments.
That's a really important point. Thanks for the check, Morgan. You're right. Using good or bad oversimplifies things. What we should say is that it had both beneficial and harmful effects, depending on whom you ask and what you're measuring. That's complexity.
So it's like you said in class the other day, history is the study of people who are not simple. I wrote that down.
I'm glad you did. People are contradictory, so history is too.
That brings us to the last one, contingency. What does that mean?
It means history isn't inevitable. Things could have gone differently. We look at turning points, at moments of choice. The Treaty of Versailles is a good example. It didn't have to punish Germany the way it did. That decision shaped the next century.
Or think of the Oneida community's eugenics program from our activity. A small group made a radical choice that reflected their context. But it wasn't the only path they could have taken. That's contingency. Things could have turned out another way.
Even today, imagine if world leaders had responded more forcefully to climate science in the 1980s. How different would our environmental policies, or even the world, be now?
So contingency is kind of like saying it didn't have to be this way.
Exactly. It reminds us that history is full of agency. People make choices, and those choices matter.
Can I ask a follow-up on that? Because when we talk about agency, I feel like it's easy to say that people had choices, but how much freedom did they really have? Like, doesn't context limit agency too?
That's a sharp observation. Agency doesn't mean total freedom. It means that within their circumstances, their beliefs, their resources, their risks, people still made decisions. The options might have been limited, but they chose from those options.
And that's where contingency and context work together. Context shapes what choices are available, but contingency reminds us that the outcomes weren't guaranteed.
Actually, that's something Arnold brings up too, the idea that historians build interpretations through choices. They choose which sources to trust, which voices to emphasize, and which questions to ask. There's no view from nowhere in history. Every account reflects decisions made by the historian. So in a way, historians are also part of the story.
Perfect summary, Casey.
I'd say you're thinking like a historian.
Thanks, and thank you both. This really helped me see how historians build interpretation, not just absorb it. And for everyone listening, next time, we'll dig into the historian's toolbox even more. We'll be talking about where historians get their information. What's the difference between a primary and secondary source? What's in an archive? And what happens when voices are missing? Thanks for joining us on the Once and Future Present. If you want to see some of these concepts in action, check out our AP Euro music albums. Just search Hammer History Productions on YouTube or Spotify. Until next time, stay curious and think critically.